Our guest this episode is Chris Duprey. He is a coach, speaker, and creator who helps leaders and sales professionals have breakthrough conversations. He's worked in the Army, the business world, and as a coach to inspire lasting change. Starting his journey in the 82nd Airborne Division, he learned the value of listening and being present, which shaped his approach to leadership and self-awareness. Over time, he worked with incredible mentors and adopted mindfulness practices, all of which led him to his current role as a partner at the Question First Group. Here to discuss how intentional communication, self-awareness, and growth can create meaningful breakthroughs in both leadership and personal development. Please welcome to the podcast, Chris Duprey. Welcome, Chris. Welcome to the Engaging Personalities Podcast. I'm Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, where we're on a mission to rehumanize business through engagement. We believe that we can all be more successful if we can command attention and deepen connection. So stick around to the end of the show and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest on a future episode. So let's get ready to engage.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right. So just before we started, it's like I just said, hey, you're a standing virtual call guy like me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a big fan of that. I'm just curious, what brought you to the standing side of things?
So so much of communication is not just vocal.
Yeah.
And you have to have an energy, especially if you're leading a meeting, if you're just want to be an engaged participant. Standing helps, right? And so when I'm seated, I'm more docile, I'm more calm, there's less energy. And, I feel like this is the way that it should be. It should be energy, we should bring energy to conversations, not take energy from conversations. Yeah. I'll tell you, even in-person stuff, if I'm the coach facilitating, I can't sit at a conference room table.
Mm-hmm.
I will walk around, I'll stand up. It is just the way that I communicate best.
Yeah. Amen is all I got to say. Well, no, it's not all I got to say, because there's a few things you did that, again, I want to point out too, is that, the energy piece is so, like, for me, when I stand, okay, now I can be on, right?
Yeah.
But it depends on the personality too, because sometimes people might be too fidgety, move around too much. Sometimes they need something to anchor them, so there can be some personal choices there. But there was something that you said, and you actually you move closer to the camera, and so in effect, we zoomed in on you, right? And that brings emphasis on what you're going to say. And so this idea, and that's in NLP, they talk about submodality shifts, making something bigger, right? In your mind, typically makes it more engaging, more intense of an experience, right? And making something smaller. But the fact that just by leaning or moving your feet a little bit, you're able to then affect the visual experience someone's having. So very cool. Anyways, it's we're singing from the same song page or song sheet there.
Yes.
Chris, I want to go back to your background about being in the Airborne Division there. Because I in the intro there is something like where you learned listening in the military.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I kind of chuckle a little bit because I can just see a drill sergeant screaming at you, and you're practicing listening and mindfulness, perhaps. But that's maybe not how it happened. Can you maybe
that's not how that one goes. So I'm going to try to give you the quick version. So it was really my time. I was a captain. I had just come back from Iraq as an advisor. I went to the Maneuver Captain's Career Course, got assigned to 82nd Airborne Division, and I was assigned to 1st Brigade of the 82nd as the Deputy Plans Officer. And so my boss was the plans officer, and his whole mission in life, by the way, his name's Adam Barlow. He's a colonel now. He commanded an infantry battalion in Alaska, super awesome dude, one of my biggest mentors. And his whole goal was to help me get ready for command. And so we're in Afghanistan, and we're spending 19, 20 hours a day together, right? So waking up, doing PT, eating breakfast, like working all this time. And he pulled me in for like a counseling session. So think in the corporate world, think a one-on-one, right? And again, this guy had been helping me get ready to go take command, which was at the time my only professional goal in life was to command an infantry company. And then on top of it, it was in the 82nd Airborne Division. I'm like, my mind's blown as all this is happening. But he sits me down and he says, so Chris, hey man, one of the things you have to work on is, and he said like the first two sentences. And I immediately cut him off, right? And said, well, sir, I'm working on that. Blah, blah, blah. And he looks at me, dead faced, and says, Chris, you cut me off again, I'm going to punch you in the face. And by the way, we're in southern Ghazni on a base, active combat zone. And I cut him off. He says he's going to punch me in the face. And at that moment, Anders, I realized, holy smokes, I'm not actually listening. I'm like, I remember trying to tell him, like, well, my brain's doing all this stuff. And he's like, you need to listen and just sit there. And so he used to carry around a bunch of pens. And so I emulated him, but it just didn't matter. I didn't know what they meant. And so I still, to this day, so this was the summer of 2012. It is now February of 2025. I still carry the 3 pens. Red is simple. This is for tasks, right? Like when you're writing down tasks. I hold this pen when I'm talking. And when it's my turn to talk, it's a blue pen. And when I'm writing notes, blue signals that these are my thoughts. But when I'm listening, I hold this green pen. And I hold it with all of my, like everything, so that I actually sit in and listen. And if I had not had that experience, I wouldn't have known that I was a poor listener, because most people don't know that they're poor listeners. And so for the last 13 years, almost, I have been carrying these 3 Pilot what are they? Pilot G2 pens, red, green, and blue, so that when I should be listening, I actually listen and I don't let the crazy start going. And that is a lesson I learned while I was an Army officer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's I when you started that story, first of all, you said I was in Afghanistan, and I was like, I'm listening. Like that's like the setting definitely, has some, presence to that. But then the pens, I just want to kind of break that down a little bit, is that these pens are like physical props that signal a state that you want to have, and a physical reminder of what you're trying to do. Like, so when you're hanging on to the green pen, that's listen, right?
Mhm.
And so when you speak, when it's finally your turn, do you switch pens at that point, or you just like let go of the pen, or how does that, like, what does that mechanics look like there?
Yeah. So it depends, right?
Yeah.
So like for this, now granted, this is 12 years later or 13, whatever the math is, right? I don't need it as much because as you said, I got into mindfulness and my awareness has gone up.
Yeah.
But if I'm in a big team meeting, let's say, I will do exactly what you said. When I was the COO at Impact, I would literally like hold it up like this so that everybody knew that I was listening, and there would be a big change over. And it also almost became like a visual cue for everybody else, like, okay, Chris is going to share his thoughts now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's like the conch. Like now you can
yeah,
speak because you're
yes,
hanging on to the blue. Yeah.
yeah. But today, I mean, literally, I've got a baby Yoda head full of green, blue, and red pens next to my desk, and I always have these 3 pens in front of me so that I practice my practice,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because listening is so important to communicating, and it's like the largest gap that I see whenever I watch leaders have conversations, or salespeople are the worst listeners in the whole world. We can go into that if you'd like at some point, but um, these tools help me significantly.
it reminds me a little bit when I was teaching, and we're talking a little bit about virtual engagement and standing and
Mhm.
everything, but early on I had cut myself from a post-it note a little arrow, and I stuck it to the bottom of my camera so
Mhm.
that it reminded me when I saw the arrow, oh, look in the eye of the other person, right? And now I've got this Elgato teleprompter set up that I'm actually looking straight at you where the camera
Right.
is, so that it eliminates that. But it was one of those things that I didn't need that post-it note after a while, because
Right.
we would trained, you trained yourself on it. But it didn't mean that, again, still having these reminders and this thing to shift our really our physical behavior
Yeah.
into doing. I love that story. I find that fascinating.
Thank
So
you.
so that self-awareness that came out of
Mm.
that, how do you, other than pens, or maybe you teach the pen piece to others, how do you kind of teach this self-awareness and this and the listening piece?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I definitely share that story with all my clients, all the groups that I talk to when we talk about this. Um, but what I found is that the biggest thing, and what I needed, right, was somebody to shock me into awareness. And while I'm not going to tell somebody what Adam told me back then, um, with a lot of sales teams, I just make them watch a sales call with me that they did,
Mm,
and they'll all of a sudden go,
yeah.
"Oh," right? And if it's a leader, I'm like, "Hey, record your next one-on-one. Let's watch it together." And when you show people how they actually show up versus how they think they show up,
Yeah.
it's usually a good starter. And then the conversation becomes, okay, how do you remember to do those behaviors? How do we take these changes in behavior, turn them into habits, or how do we give ourselves, like, I always joke, what's your green pen, right?
Mm.
What's your green pen, is definitely a phrase that I use a lot
I
with these folks.
I like that. Like, it's a great jumping off point, right?
Yeah.
And you're speaking, well, in your group, you're speaking the same language. You kind of have this
Yeah.
code word for that kind of piece. Um,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit more about the mindfulness journey that you've been on, because that's, again, people don't associate that with ex-military. Um,
Yeah. No, no, no. Yeah. Walking contradiction, probably.
yeah.
Um, so truth be told, I was out of the army for 2 years, maybe. So I was past my first job. It was probably 2.5 years. I had done a post-army job for about a year and was in grad school at the time. And I was in my second job. And I was listening to, and I was like I was burning it everywhere, right? So um I was getting to my office. I had an office in Hartford, Connecticut, and I was getting to the office at like 5:30 in the morning and staying in Hartford until 6, 7 o'clock at night. And it was just running me ragged doing the job that I was doing. And I was listening to the Learning Leader Show with Ryan Hawk. I hope that I just said that name right, because I think that's who it is. Love that show. But I was listening to it, and I think it may have been James Clear that was on. But I've been looking back to see who was the guest that talked about doing a 10-minute meditation, because I
Mhm.
can remember this very clearly. I was driving into Hartford, listening to this. They recommended one of the apps, and I said, you know what? I'll try anything at this point. So I sat down, I downloaded the app, and I did a 10-minute guided meditation. And I opened my eyes at the end and went, holy smokes. Like, I feel this is different.
Hmm.
So I started doing it, and I started doing it every day for 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Then I read 10% Happier by Dan Harris. And that introduced me to all of these Westerners who went to India, Thailand, um, Burma, and became, like, they all became Buddhist, and they all studied under all these great teachers. So I start reading all their books. And then I find out that I live in Connecticut, that there's a place that they all started like an hour and a half away. And so I think it was, oh man, it was like this time 2019. So about 6 years ago, I went on my first silent retreat for about a week at the um, Insight Meditation Society, IMS. And it was the second I walked into the meditation hall, I was home. You know that feeling when you just walk in somewhere and you're like, and that's what it was. And so I just really dove into it and I stopped eating meat at the time to practice the Buddhist precepts. I have since gone back to eating meat, but I did that for 5.5 years. I stopped drinking as part of that, and I haven't, and that's been over 6 years now, just as part of a mindfulness practice.
Hmm.
And then I did another retreat right before COVID. And there was a point in my life where I was doing 2 hours of seated meditation a day. Uh,
Whoa.
yeah. And so now, again, it's like that was a foundation. So now I do chunks of time at times. I try to sort of do more mindfulness in action at this point. But if I wrote in my journal right before this, is like, I need a weekend of nothing soon to just
Hmm.
go recharge, sit on my cushion, and just do that. But the thing that I found with it all is that the second that I could just be right here and just be with you right now and not worry about any of the other things, I got really, really good at the stuff that I was doing, no matter what it was. So when I was a kid, I tried to play guitar and sing. Couldn't do it. After this mindfulness journey during COVID, I bought a ukulele. And within 2 weeks, I could play different rhythms and sing, which then led to me having a whole room full of guitars and a band that's coming over later today for band practice, right? But things I couldn't do, I could do now because I could concentrate on specific things
Hmm.
instead of getting caught in the monkey mind.
I got a whole bunch of takeaways and things I want to comment on. So
Okay.
doing my best to listen and be present, Chris, with you here. Um, One of them, I'm so happy for you that you found mindfulness before COVID, because I
Mm.
bet that helped a ton,
Oh
right?
yeah. Well, it was quite lovely. Other than other than having to teach my kids how to do schoolwork,
Right.
like
Yeah.
it was helpful. Yeah.
It reminds me of a time that in my office here, I have my little virtual studio and everything, and a friend of mine, Derry Latimer, who's a speaker, she would come over and do her virtual keynotes at my office. And so this
Mm.
was during very strict lockdown kind of time,
Oh
but
yeah.
there was just the two of us in here or whatever. I would stay downstairs and kind of monitor everything on another Zoom account, and she would just do like a 1 minute of mindfulness in her keynote and make everyone
Mhm.
close their eyes and feet flat on the
Yeah.
floor. And I just remember like going like, I'm the technical manager on this keynote, but I'm going to do this too, right? And just giving people that little taste of like, and it's okay to do this, right? Like giving yourself permission is a big thing, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm feeling from you, and I'm going to guess that people who work with you, that you train, you have an effect on them through your presence. Would that be fair in saying?
It feels weird to answer, but I think the answer is yes. Right? Like
Like,
I we can have deeper conversations than most coaches or trainers that they probably had in the past.
hmm,
Is usually something that gets said.
yeah, yeah. I I feel like while you hold space for people, and at the same time, I find myself, if people listen to this podcast, I'm probably slowing down. Like you're making we're meshing here together, or
Mhm,
coalescing, or the rapport is happening,
mhm.
even virtually. But just the idea that, yeah, the way that you are being is changing me. Just so I'm tuned into that anyways.
I think that, so this is a really interesting point to talk through, though, real quick. I think that like, all people can have that impact
Yeah.
on each other, right? Energy shifts all the time. Folks that are aware of their energy are usually the ones that can use it for good,
Mhm.
right? So so like, if you go think of a horrible meeting that you've been a part of, the leader clearly lacked self-awareness and had bad energy and didn't know that they were throwing off bad energy,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But when you meet with somebody that understands it, they'll speed up, they'll slow down, they'll get louder, they'll come down, they'll come in, they'll come out purposefully to bring things in the direction that is for good, the direction that it needs to go, versus that negative energy that just sucks the life out of everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. So
Yeah.
I love
I
you brought that up.
I feel like when you are talking with new prospective clients, that they feel connected, for one, I'm going to guess. And then the other piece is the buyer safety that you create because you're grounded, right? And for people, I hope the listeners are going like, wow, you guys are having real love in here. Like, but the I just want to point this out because I think, and I think you can relate to this too, Chris, is that like the energy woo woo, like I come from a performance background, so I get that, and I try to bring a little bit over into business, and in a way that I feel like it can be accepted, right?
Yeah.
And so all of these things matter, right? And it sometimes takes people, they go on different journeys to
Yeah.
come to a place where they understand that, right?
Yeah. And now here's the thing. Don't take mindful, intentional, thoughtful and say, not going to kick your butt as we go through stuff. Right? It is about
It's not being
what is,
soft,
yeah,
right?
it's not
Like,
being soft, right? That's the thing. And I had, listen, Adam Barlow, not soft, right? To this day, I literally just, so he his nickname for me at one point was Utterly Worthless. And it was this huge joke because everybody knew how tight the two of us were and how much our work needed to be together. But I just won some award and I shouted him out in LinkedIn. And he literally wrote, like, so glad, maybe that nickname might not have been right, Utterly Worthless, or something like it's still stuck. But anytime that I see him or see anything, I want to go prove myself because that dude always made me want to be varsity versus
mm,
JV. But he loved me. He was all about helping. And he was by no means soft, but he was totally intentional and thoughtful and
mhm,
there. And so I think that we equate mindful, thoughtful, caring as weak, soft, and ineffective. And I just think that's garbage.
mhm,
The best leaders that I've seen are way more in tune to themselves than they are to anything else.
mhm.
Because when they know who they are, they aren't worried about everybody else.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's when they're effective.
Let me ask you this, Chris. With the clients that you have and the work that you do with them, the ones that get the best results, what what changes are they making in themselves to bring that about?
So I think it goes back to something that James Clear talks about, right? Which is, to change a habit, you have to start with the identity, like how you see yourself before going to the outcome, right? And so for us, it's that they see themselves as what we call pathfinders, which are, in breakthrough conversations, our framework. These are folks that when they communicate, they're communicating for the audience's best interest, and they're super curious. So they're helping you and the audience get to self-discovery.
Mhm.
They see themselves as people like the leaders see themselves as, my job is not to tell you what to do, it's to help you discover it for yourself. When that is ingrained in their core being, they succeed tenfold. Salespeople, it's not my job to sell you this thing. It's my job to help guide you to make the right buying decision for you.
Mhm.
When they make that switch in their brains and in their being, then they show up curious, helpful, others focused. Nothing gets in their way because, hey, if you don't work with me, that's cool, but here's the stuff you need to go do. The second you say that to the second you say it authentically to a buyer, they start to trust you 10x more.
Mhm.
But they can tell when it's BS or when it's authentic.
Mhm.
And it comes from how, like, are you really becoming a student of communication and leaning into those things?
Yeah.
Or are you just trying to learn some quick tactics
Right.
to
Gimmick.
be
Yeah. Kind of.
yeah,
Right. Because like you're right. We have built-in BS detectors, right? We're gonna
100%.
know, right? I sense a little bit of, maybe some Buddhism in there being detached from the outcome, right? For yourself, wanting the best for others and helping,
Yeah.
maybe helping eliminate their struggle, right? Or their suffering.
Yeah.
um,
I mean,
but
for
yeah,
me personally, yes.
yes,
But
yeah.
um,
And I'm
but
not
that's
saying that that's part. I'm just saying I see the thematically, but that
yeah,
detaching from it and then just coming from that intention, I can see how that frees people up instead of trying to, force things down someone's throat.
yeah.
Um, you know,
Well,
your own
so just
agenda.
think about it. Think about it, and it can be sales or leadership, doesn't really matter. When you try to just push something on somebody,
Hmm.
you're always met with resistance. Like every single time when it's some sort of a change, you're met with resistance. Maybe there's 10% of people that just love change and are just cool, let's go do it, boss. But most people are going to sit back and go, what does this mean for me?
Hmm.
And if we lean into all of those things, those moments don't happen because we know how to have the right conversation.
Hmm. And I think that big part of helping them discover, my coach has always said, if they don't say it, they won't pay it. Right. Like, meaning
100%.
it's got to be their idea. They've got to say, this is what we need, that kind of thing. And for you to say it for them doesn't work. Right. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And this is learned experience too, by the way. I I remember getting so at Impact, I was selling a coaching program, selling a coaching deal to work with me on my partner. So my partner in the Question First group, also a partner at Impact, and he wrote a book called They Ask You Answer. And somebody saw him speak. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so excited. I want to go do this. And I was like, great. Here's exactly what you need to do. And it costs this much. And it was like, it just crashed and burned. And that experience, like, oh, this person was excited, but I don't know what his actual problem was that this solves. I don't know how impactful or even how important solving it is and where it stacks up against other things. So how did I just go tell him what it's going to cost without getting all that information first? And it was like, okay, put it in the kit bag as we start coaching people.
mhm.
These are the things that everybody runs into. And I'm sure you've had a sales experience where somebody has heard you say, hey, I'm interested in this. And then they pitch the whole thing and you're like, yeah, that's actually not the problem I have. So I'm good.
Mhm.
These are like the learned things that we've seen and we encounter. And if all you did was ask a question, and slow down. And then you're still going to be fine. You know, I'll give you this one saying and see what you think about it. It's an Army one. And it was slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And we learned it as young infantry officers doing enter and clear a room. Because if 4 dudes or dudettes run into a room, you're going to shoot somebody. So they would say slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And I didn't get it as a young lieutenant. But now I see in business, it's like, oh yeah, we're not going slow because we're lazy. We don't want to make 17 mistakes. And the less mistakes we make, the faster we're actually going to go. So slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Yeah.
And if you think about that with communication, it's a huge key.
It's funny how long we've been communicating, you know, as a race, as a species, I should say, like, you know, as humans. And we still have to relearn this, like and some people never learn it, right? Like it's kind of, we're always working on ourselves, and that's part of that awareness piece. But yeah.
So it's just like in, you know, I don't know if you have kids, but I have kids that like did the new math, and I don't know the new math, right? Like I don't get it, but they teach that, but they don't teach how to effectively ask questions. They don't teach these things that are like huge building blocks for success.
Yeah.
Right. I wish they would teach sales in high school. Or at least basic communication.
Yeah. Call it communication class or something. Right.
Yeah.
And then, and I mean, it's also, I mean, and in some schools do it, but like similar is that this kind of financial literacy that would be so important in adult life. Right.
But this is, so if when we think like one of the aspirations that my company has is the work that we're doing will someday be taught at least in business school. Like it shouldn't need coaches like me and Marcus and Zach and Chris Marr. It should be something that is part of a curriculum for an MBA. It should be something that's part of an undergraduate business degree, so that we can have better leaders everywhere.
Yeah. It's well, that's a great, you know, big, hairy, audacious goal to have and to work towards. And I've enjoyed my time with you, and I look down at the time and I go, like, we're probably over half an hour, but I'm like, that's probably one of the quickest 30 minutes I've experienced. And that's also a lesson to people, that when time dilates, when you're in a conversation, that you're in a deep conversation, you had rapport. There is, you know, you're being present in the moment so much that you're not noticing time, you know?
That's right.
So how can people dig into you, Chris, in your group and your partners, if people are listening and want to reach out?
Yeah. So easiest way is on LinkedIn for me, Chris Duprey, bald bearded guy. The Question First group has a page there too. And then if you just go to questionfirstgroup.com, you'll see all about us. Those are the ways, my friend.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much. I'm, like I said, like I always love meeting people, you know, interviewing them for my podcast, because, you know, every one of them affects me in different ways. And definitely this conversation has. So thank you so much for taking the time and being here.
You're so welcome, Anders.
And I want to thank all the listeners, of course, for tuning in once again. And until next time, you know what to do. Stay engaged. Thank you so much for listening to Engaging Personalities. If you believe this world needs more engagement and you're an industry leader, or you have an interesting take on rehumanizing business, go to go.engagify.ai/podcast-guest to apply and come on the show. If you got something out of this interview, do you mind sharing it on your social media? Just grab a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, Tag them on social media to let them know about the show. Include the hashtag engaging personalities. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episode, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, engageify.ai, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and stay engaged.